There we go. Huh, I wonder how I got muted. Okay. Again, hello, everyone. So we're going to learn about how to work in a remote environment as leading teams and also being part of a team. Deborah DiNincenzo, hopefully I pronounced that right, is joining us. She has experience with and has been teaching about how to work in a virtual environment for 20 years, actually taught a class in grad school how to do that. And I'm going to just touch on that briefly and let Deborah let everyone know more about herself and her background. Deborah?
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. It's great to be here. It's especially great not to have needed to get on an airplane and fly all the way to the West Coast to be able to join you. And so we're kind of living and experiencing one of the upsides of our expanding virtual world and remote workplace. So I am talking with you today, this evening, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I would love to just have some sense of where everyone else is. So if you could, please just put in the chat where you're located. And that would just give us an idea of where everyone is. So we just get some sense of presence, which is part of what we want to do in these kinds of events. So Huntington Beach, I had a dear friend who lived in Huntington Beach and visited there often. So we got the East Coast and the West Coast and Las Vegas covered. That's great. All right, wonderful. That's great to see so many people from so many different locations. So thanks for sharing that. You can keep posting as we move along. I have a lot of content I'd like to cover with our time together. And so I'll just keep forging ahead. We will have time for Q&A at the end. But briefly, our agenda is to talk about building trust and commitment in the remote workplace, how to have engaging remote meetings, how to do our best remote work, both as leaders and as members of teams, and the reality of when we bring our work with us or we bring it home with us, we need to integrate it with the rest of our lives, and what are the challenges of that and the new challenges in the current environment. In lieu of a note-taking guide of any sort, I'm going to encourage everyone to grab a piece of paper or if you prefer, to grab your smartphone or use your computer and to draw a line down the middle, and in one column, write to do, and the other column to write stop doing. And some of you may remember Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, reminded us that as important as our to-do list, where we have our priorities, and that's how we keep track of what we're focused on, is our stop doing list. So as you're listening to me and to each other, when we start sharing a little bit later, you will get ideas. An idea will pop into your head, or you'll say, that's a really great idea, I should try that, or that might work for my team. Jot it down on your to-do list. You might also hear some things to say, wait, yeah, I do that, and that's really not helpful. I need to stop doing that. Capture that in your stop doing list. And so what we're all faced with now is a lot of change in the way that we work and the way that we live. We certainly have come through the last year facing many new challenges and changes. And so I start all of my presentations, because almost everything involves change, with this quote from Bruce Barton: when you're through changing, you're through. And so we have to remain resilient. One of the words that was bandied about a lot in the last year throughout the COVID times was pivot. We all had to learn how to pivot. And businesses and organizations that are thriving are doing so because they learned to pivot. Think about restaurants who couldn't have any people come in. And so the ones that are doing well learned how to be able to do well with takeout. And so Bruce Barton, by the way, was an advertising executive in the 1940s. He was also a congressman from the state of New York. And think about what Bruce Barton said in the 40s, before all the influx of information that we have coming to us now. So this is well before the internet and all of our crazy times. This is a cartoon that ran in the 70s, in 1979. in the New Yorker. And I'm not sure what was funny about it in 1979, but I love how it now captures pretty much what our workplace is going to look like. And this is, to me, a really good example of what a hybrid team looks like, except if we took a picture the next day, it'd be a different group of people there. So we're looking at a lot of change in the workplace where a few people will be there and most everybody else will be someplace else. And it will be evolving day by day. So we're going to see more organizations expanding remote work, fewer people coming into work every day, and different groups of people interacting. And we will soon find out that people who are traveling into the office to spend their time on the computer, on the phone, and on web meetings won't want to do that nearly as much. So our work world, our whole world, looks a lot different now as well. So our reality with remote work and hybrid teams means that we're mixing it up a lot. We won't necessarily see the same people. We might interact with teams, our team and other teams, and we're trying to blend all of that with the reality of the other aspects of our lives. And so when I put this slide up, people with young families, typically grown. So my webmaster, for example, we're working on a new website, and I just had a meeting with him yesterday. He's got 3 children under the age of 5, and they're all boys. And so I asked him how it was going. He said, "It's noisy here." And of course, you have 3 kids under the age of 5. He really resonated with the images here. And so it's a lot of, kind of looks like chaos, right? And a lot of activity and some headaches. And that's sort of our new reality. I like to call it our next normal. And so let's do a quick poll if we can. And I'm not sure who's putting the poll up, but if we have the poll ready. While all of these are concerns with the remote work environment that we're moving into, I'd like you to just identify the one that you feel is of greatest concern to you regarding remote work. So the poll should be up now. And if you would just click on whichever of these issues, and again, they're all important. And of course, we need to build trust to get everyone on the same page. Having effective meetings remotely, not a natural thing for a lot of people. We certainly got immersed into it during the last year, however. And so would like to just get a sense of what feels most critical for you. And we'll just let this run for just a few more seconds here for anyone else that wants to participate. And then we'll see what the results are. Always interesting to get different perspectives here. So, all right, so let's just look at this in terms of results. Managing and maintaining productivity balanced with effective remote meetings, and our remote communication is how we get a lot of our work done, our communication done, even building trust and building rapport. So having effective meetings is really important, and maintaining and managing our productivity. So when we first all went home last year, it happened rather suddenly, and some people were not prepared. Organizations were not prepared. And so there were people who were just in a little bit of a malaise, aside from the fact that in some cases their kids were home, but they really weren't clear about what their priorities were. And we were all in a state of flux and confusion. And of course, when we all went into lockdown last year, remember, we thought it was a 3-week adventure. And here we are more than a year later, and many organizations are still not back. And so, so obviously technology would not be a concern for this crowd, which is great. If in other environments, technology is of a greater concern. I have been working with a client, just did 3 other Zoom meetings today to do training for an agency that's funded by the Department of Labor. And they help seniors who need to move or want to move back into the workplace to find jobs. And those jobs are paid for and funded by the Department of Labor, and they go and work in other government agencies. And that's all fine and good, but then COVID happened. And a lot of people don't want to go back into office environments. And they had to figure out how to make this work in the last year anyway. So I have spent several days training people, all of whom were over the age of 85. And bless her little heart, I had one woman today who asked a question, and she said, well, I just need to know how to get better at using my computer. I'm 87 years young. And I'm thinking, wow, it's so impressive that people are out there and still trying this stuff. So, in the workplace, we're going to have, continue to have more generations, and that creates another whole set of challenges from a communication perspective. Because I can assure you that the people I had in my webinar earlier today are not so adept at technology, but they're trying. So from a leader perspective, leaders have a number of challenges and questions about how this remote environment is going to work. Obviously, if you're managing a team, you are concerned about productivity and how we're going to maintain productivity, how we're going to manage performance and offer feedback and coaching. The old mantra, which is not nearly as true as it was 5 or 10 years ago, of the out of sight, out of mind. And while that could be a problem because people aren't in front of you, leaders need to be proactive about reaching out to team members so they don't feel isolated or forgotten. The question of how do I know they're really working? We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into this, but it's really a performance management question. And I happen to believe that remote work is going to be the best thing that ever happened for performance management, because we have to be clear about our expectations of people. And so how we're going to meet goals, and also, depending on the kind of business that you're in, are we going to have a drop in service levels? Most organizations have figured this out. In the last year, I have needed support from Dell, from QuickBooks, and from Google. And I barely even had to wait very long on the phone. And I was helped by people from other countries in very different time zones. But they were there. I got the service I needed. They were able to come to my computer to fix issues. And most of them, of course, were working from home. So there's a question here from Ian about how to engage other team members and make them feel included in Zoom meetings. And we're going to talk about that. But one way to do that is to use the tools within Zoom. And so, on the fly, ask people questions, ask them to chat, do polling if you can. There are a lot of great tools in Zoom. If we were meeting for 3 hours instead of 1 hour, we would definitely break into some small groups and go into breakout rooms and do a little bit of small group work and come back and report out. And so I have another client that I did work for. We did training over a 6-month period of time. And all of my workshops with them were 2-day Zoom events. Which it feels like a long slog, right? When you hear about being with a group for 2 days, and we limited the groups to 8. So when I broke them into small groups to skill practice, to actually practice the skills we were talking about, they were in very small groups of 3 or 4, and then we'd come back in the large group. The large group was only 8. That really allowed for a lot more sharing and comfort with sharing than you would find in a really large group. But we will talk a little bit more about that. Thank you for that question. Now, while leaders might have some concerns, so do people who work remote. So your team members will have their own set of challenges as we move people to remote environments, working from home in most cases. People can feel isolated. Certainly the work-life balance challenge. We don't know when to turn it off. We're going to talk about that because that's really important. So becoming a little bit more of a workaholic than we are accustomed to being before, we can have some very bad habits that start to happen. and lots more distractions. For many people, finding a suitable workplace, it's one thing when you plan this. What happened last year with COVID was we sent millions of people home who didn't have a home office of any sort, and maybe didn't have the space even. So you have people that live in small apartments, and then their kids were there as well. So identifying a suitable workplace, and we'll talk briefly later about what that means to have a suitable workplace. And then for people who work from home and particularly don't have a lot of experience with this, the perceptions of others. Just because they're home, some people might think that they're not really working, or they don't really understand what that means. So sometimes we have to educate those around us. So another quick poll, I'd be curious to see what you think are the most important remote leader skills. So in terms of leading a team where people are either remote or hybrid, where they're not all co-located. And some people, if we could get this poll up, I'd like you to pick the top one, the top skill that you think is, actually we need the next poll, Stacy, or whoever's doing polls.
Jeff,
I see number one. Can we move to number two? Not sure how to do that. So we want to pick and I can't see what everyone else is seeing.
I can't even.
I'm not sure if the second poll is up or not.
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay, excellent, good. People are chiming in here, so excellent. So what you think is the most important remote leader skill? And just pick one. They're all important, I'll tell you that. They're all important, but I'd like to see what you think is the most important one. So if you could input to this poll, that would be great. I'll take a quick break here. Okay, all right, we're finding the poll. Yes, question?
People are able to fill it out for some reason.
I'm sorry, what? What was that comment?
I think we need to do the first one again and the second one. It makes you do both.
Oh, it makes you do both. Okay,
I think so.
all right,
All right, so if anybody would mind just choosing
Right.
one at the top.
okay. All right. And I think we have enough of a sense here, actually. So let's just look at this and share results. Okay, so for the second poll, because we've already seen the first one, not a surprise, communication. We think communication is the most important skill, and it is vitally important. There are some other ones that are important as well. Certainly, building trust is important, coaching and feedback, and managing performance. But guess what? They all tie back to how we communicate, how effectively we communicate, and how creatively we communicate. So thank you for sharing all of that, your thoughts on that. And let's just delve into what we could do about some of those things. So effective remote leaders, there are 8 areas that we focus on as we're developing skills for remote leaders. And I'll just highlight these real quickly. Obviously, it's all about results. So, none of us work and we don't send people home to work or anything just because it's fun. We do it because we need to get results. And when we're not getting results, we need to be providing feedback and coaching people, not only for performance improvement, but we need to coach people for success. So we've seen a lot of organizations in the last year that have hired people and have hired them remotely. And people are working in these organizations and they've never met the people that they work with. They only really meet them this way. And while that seems odd and different, it's working quite well in many organizations. Does that mean we don't miss being together? No, it doesn't mean that. People still, I think when we're all able to get back together, there's going to be a little flurry of that, and then it will level out again. But most of the data right now that I'm seeing indicates that most people would like to see their coworkers occasionally, but they would really prefer to work remotely the bulk of the time. And the ideal seems to be at around the 3 to 4 days a week. So it's important to clarify expectations, to honor commitments and follow through on commitments when we're supporting remote workers. Trust is very important, and we'll touch on that real quickly as well. Obviously, technology proficiency is important because we do so much of our work and our communication through technology tools. And so when we put these tools out there, it's really helpful to train people on how to use them. So one of my clients several years ago was the FBI, and this was shortly after 9/11, and they decided that they really needed to have supervisory special agents like out in the field, not in offices, and out there looking for terrorists, I guess, or whatever. And so they said, oh, so they need Blackberries, and they deployed about 1,200 Blackberries to people and didn't train them how to use them. And so we had a bunch of confused FBI agents trying to figure out how to use their Blackberries. And so we have to remember to make sure we give them great technology and we teach them how to use it. So strong interpersonal skills, again, driven by how well we communicate. And as a leader, understanding the dynamics of the remote work issues that our teams face. So the underpinnings of remote leadership for me and the research that I've done really comes into three elements: trust, communication, and performance. It's really important that there be trust, just like in any relationship. If trust isn't there, doesn't mean we have to be face-to-face, doesn't mean we have to have our first meeting on site. It means we need to invest in getting to know people and understanding the elements of trust, because when trust declines, performance declines. And so the elements of trust are familiarity. It's really hard to trust someone you don't know. We don't know if we can rely on them. So we need to get to know them. Much of what happens when we work on site with people is we do kind of just get to know them by virtue of being around them. And so we have to create new ways of doing that. And the technology that we have now to be able to do that is so much more superior to when I started in this business, which Stacy mentioned was truly 2 decades ago. I published my first book called 101 Tips for Telecommuters in 1999. So think about what we had in 1999, folks. We had no Zoom, and we had dial-up modems to go to AOL for email. It was so primitive. So we've come a long way, and we can leverage wonderful technology for the human connections that we need. So integrity as it relates to honesty and reliability, being able to count on people and know that when you've asked somebody to do something or they say they're going to call you, that it happens. And so communication also, you've already identified, is very important. And I would just like to emphasize, as we go more remote and we have more hybrid teams, and we certainly realized this in the last year, that when we're doing this, it is not the time to under-communicate. If anything, we need to over-communicate a little bit, particularly as we're onboarding new people, or as I like to call it, reboarding everyone as we move back to whatever the new on-site workplace is going to look like. And it won't be the same. It will be different in some ways. So all this communication that we need to do, I call it distance dialogue. And it goes on in all kinds of different ways with many, many more tools that we have to communicate that can sometimes be overwhelming because there's so much of it. And it's going on all the time. And so it looks like this, a little bit chaotic, because we not only just, like in the old days, we just had to worry about the email in our inboxes, but now we've got texts going and online chats going, and we've got video conferences that we're doing and all kinds of ways. And we still have email too on top of all of that. So we have all these different ways that we are communicating with people. What's important is to keep in mind, both as team member and as a leader, that it's the quality of the communication and the frequency that matters. So while we don't want to ignore people that work remotely, we do tend to, and I did this even when I had people on site and I had salespeople that reported to me, you tend to think the good ones that know what they're doing and they're just independent and they can sell like crazy and they called me when they needed me, that's great, because I had other people who were having performance problems. But I had to remember to occasionally just reach out to them and say, hey, I was just thinking about you today. How's it going? And now we have the tools to facilitate that, where, you know, it's the Dick Tracy world. We really can call people right from our wristwatches. So the Apple phones are watches are an incredible device that we can do more of that kind of communication on the fly, as well as the structured communication that we do. So just a quick guideline on when we are communicating with people, because communication is so vitally important. We need to remember to, when our good interaction skills, to make sure people are clear about purpose and importance. What are we talking about? Why is it important? And it's really important to listen. I like to call it listening between the lines. We really have to be listening for the emotion, the confusion. Now, when we're doing video events, and we have Zoom meetings, for example, so much better, because now we can see when people might look a little confused or not really buying in. But a lot of times we really just do have to listen. And we want to avoid monologues. I'm doing one right now. I always hate when I have to say this, but if you're doing a team meeting, as much as possible, you want to have as much interaction. The other thing that we need to learn about these kinds of meetings is, and in our work settings especially, if there's data that we can send out that people can read in advance, and we don't have to have a really boring presentation with the Excel spreadsheet, trying to see that on the screen, send that out in advance, and use our live interaction, remote communication time for discussion, for sharing of ideas, for innovating new ways to do things. So it's important to summarize frequently, check for understanding, and make sure we're all on the same page in terms of who's going to do what by when. And so Peter Drucker, long before the craziness of our remote workplace, reminded us the most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said, listening for that emotion, that concern, the opportunity to be supportive. And so in terms of how we can stay connected, both with our teams and as a team member, stay connected with our colleagues and with our managers, is to communicate often. So that means we might initiate communication as a team member to just check in with people. One of the things we found during COVID is that we did a lot of that real early on, because we were so concerned about people being out there, and many people were really not prepared. They didn't really have the right resources. It's hard to buy a laptop last year, right after lockdown. And so we did a lot of kind of these social things. And then that kind of leveled off, and people don't do as much of that. So that created opportunities just for people to share. And it was a scary time back then. We didn't know really what the heck was going on with the virus. We just knew numbers were going up and the conditions in New York City were horrible. And so it was a great time for teams and leaders to actually be supporting and listening with empathy. I have one client who has a daily stand-up meeting with his team. He leads a maintenance team in a nuclear power plant. And every day at 4:00, they have a stand-up meeting. Well, okay, their stand-up meeting had to be virtual, because some people were in the plant. They still had to do maintenance in the nuclear power plant, and other people could work from home. He designated initially, when we all went into lockdown, 2 meetings a week. They weren't allowed to talk about work. It was a stand-up meeting. It still happened at 4:00. But those 2 meetings were devoted to, how's it going? How's everybody in your family? How are you dealing with the kids at home? Just to be listening for the stress people might be under and any ways that he could support or help them. So being reliable and following through related to trust, reaching out proactively, using what I call the most live tools. And actually one of the most live tools is still the telephone, not for voicemail, but for live connections. That live human voice is very powerful, and we shouldn't underestimate it. And we have to be creative. We found lots of ways to be creative during the last year, and we're going to carry much of that into the future of remote work. So as for the question of productive and engaging virtual meetings, choosing the right technology. If you don't need to have a video meeting, then, and it's just a short, quick informational meeting, sometimes, it's always important to ask, do we even need to have this meeting, right? Because I've heard a lot in the last year how people were overwhelmed with Zoom meetings. We call it zoomed out. And I always have to feel obligated to remind people that when we all worked in the workplace, we thought we had too many meetings there too. Except that we got, bagels and donuts there. And now we have these remote meetings and we have to bring our own food. And so pick the right technology. Be prepared, know what the agenda is, know who we want to have contribute to different parts of the meeting, make sure everyone's clear about purpose and importance. Again, use the interactive tools. They're great tools. The breakout rooms are really fabulous in Zoom and other platforms. Maintain the agenda and stay focused. I am finding with my clients that actually these remote meetings are far more efficient than the meetings that we used to have when we were in the physical workplace. They tend to start on time and they tend to end on time, and people stay focused because we don't have as many sidebar conversations and we don't go down as many rabbit holes because that's harder to do. And so that's an upside, that's a good thing. So use the right technology and use it well. That gets back to making sure people are comfortable and they've learned how to use the technology, particularly leaders who are supposed to be leading meetings. And if they're not comfortable with Zoom, they're not going to be comfortable leading the meeting. And so we have a checklist that we use called the Virtual Meeting Checklist. And it's a free download. So you're welcome to go and download this. And it's at our website, www.virtualworkswell.com/checklist. And you're welcome to print it and share it within your teams, your organization. And this is a way to keep everyone on the same page about how we're going to prepare for, handle, and follow up on our virtual meetings. So what we're trying to do by staying connected, because that's what we're doing, we're using technology for the human connectivity that we don't have by not being together on site. We're really trying to create presence, virtual presence, to overcome the distance between us. And if you don't remember anything from this whole time that we're spending together, please remember this. In every case, we're trying to look at creative ways to replicate and simulate what we would do if we were face to face, and leverage the technology and use our creativity to do that. So, and I'm not sure if in the advanced material, there was information about a new book that I just published in March called Remote Leadership. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that before we wrap up. But there's a little story in there about a leader in one of my clients, and his name is Winston. And he was concerned early on during the pandemic times that his team was not together and he wanted to do something. So he created a social thing, and I was very creative. He called it Cooking with Winston. And he sent out a recipe to everybody, and they all agreed that go and buy what they needed for this chicken dinner. And then everybody brought their laptops into their kitchens, wherever they were, and they cooked a meal together and ate it together. And the most interesting, so that, that's fun and creative. But one guy on the team showed up with a live chicken. Nobody knew that he had a pet chicken. And so think about how long they'll remember this guy's pet chicken, and they'll ask him forever about his pet chicken. And so we can do a lot of fun things as it relates to staying connected and replicating and simulating. Always ask yourself, well, if we were together, what would we do? And then what's the virtual application of that. And it's not going to be exactly the same, but it might be similar enough. And we're leveraging the technology. So we also, in the midst of all of this, particularly if we're leaders, have to be concerned about performance. Or if we're just a member of a team, somebody's paying us to get results, right? And so I don't have any clients or any organizations that aren't concerned about performance results. And we achieve results in lots of different ways through our one-on-one communication and working with colleagues and with team members, with the whole team. We have to do performance monitoring. So no longer is it, because we see them here in the office and their eyes appear to be open and they appear to have a blood pressure, can we assume that they're working? Because we learned anyway that wasn't true. Lots of people sit in offices and they are sitting there, but they're not getting the targeted results that we need. And so this is why I think remote work is going to be the best thing that has happened for performance management. We also need to proactively address productivity problems. So if we have good metrics and we know what we expect of people, and we have a way to measure and monitor that, we know when there are declines in performance or productivity. We want to be proactive about addressing that soon, so it's a little problem before it becomes a big problem. And then we need to coach for both improvement and for continued success. And we need to celebrate success. This is one thing I think we're going to lose, and we have to really be conscious of, is remembering how to celebrate. We know how to do that when we're on site, right? We win a big sale, we have a little pizza party, or somebody's celebrating, their 10th anniversary with the organization. Or I worked with an organization years ago, and some of you will appreciate this. This was long before Zoom, but it was we used PictureTell for our video conferencing. We had 6 offices around the country. And when they hired me, I did not want to move to Stamford, Connecticut. I was happy being in Pittsburgh, and I didn't want to take the job. And the CEO said, well, wait, we'll just put a PictureTell system in your home office. And I flew to Stanford often, but I wasn't there every day, and I didn't have to move. And so one member of my team was pregnant. She was, we wanted to have a baby shower for her. And there were some people in California, and I didn't think it made good sense for me to fly to Connecticut for a day just for the baby shower. So I sent my gift in advance, and we had the baby shower in the video conferencing room, and the rest of the country joined for lunch. We all brought our own lunch. They had lunch there, and she opened her gifts, and we made that happen. So we've learned a lot, and people are more comfortable with that than they were before. And so it's important, though, from a performance perspective, to start with good goals. And so we have to use SMART goals. And most of you know what that is. So I'm happy to share.
Just a quick question here. I was checking the chat. So Anne's talking about, for her team, they use Kudo boards. Familiar with that?
It's like an online, it's like birthday cards and stuff like that. It's really great.
Okay, Kudo boards. All right.
Yeah, it's a really nice company. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks for sharing that. So are they like digital cards?
Yes, they are. And it's really easy for people to just put in a little funny graphic. You just choose a funny graphic. It's really engaging.
Excellent. Okay, good. Thank you for sharing that. So let me just talk a bit now about work-life balance, because that's a growing concern. And I'm sure most of you have seen the data that I've seen, where COVID has more severely impacted women. Women have left the workforce in greater numbers, because let's face it, when it comes down to making a choice, and those little kids are home, we're not leaving them home by themselves, right? And the notion that we can take care of kids and do a job, we found that didn't work so well. We knew that, but I want to just touch on a few things. So we don't want to be feeling like this. This is also from like the 80s, back when I can remember I would go into the office on Saturday and Sunday. It was crazy. Okay, now we have our work with us all the time. Whether you have a home office, whether you officially work at home or not, This is an issue because our work travels with us in this technology that is wonderful on one hand and oppressive if we let it be on the other hand. So back in 2001, I published a book called .com, The Search for Sanity in a Wired World. We're working on an update of that book right now about the search for balance in the wireless world. And what we learned from the research we did back then, and so much of this is still true today, that overload occurs because people have so much access to us. There's too much information, and we have too much work. We don't know because most organizations don't clarify for people, when we need to shut it off. I tell leaders all the time, you cannot email your people on your team at 9 o'clock at night and expect them to have any sense that you don't want a response till the next day. Set it to go out the next morning. Unless, of course, you're on the organ transplant team and they need you to head to the hospital. The other problem with access, if you think about it, because we have this technology now right in our hands or right in our wrists, it vibrates or it rings, and we no longer are clear about what's urgent. We just think because it vibrates or rings, everything is that important, and we tend to look at it all the time. So that creates why we have this sense of overload. And so we have all these dynamics that come into play that are causing us anxiety. And so in the interest of time, we're going to skip right over this chat because I know you know in your own heart what is your biggest work-life balance challenge. And so there are a few things that we need to keep in mind and 5 areas that we learned from the research that we did for the .com book. People, to achieve some sense of balance, figured out they needed to prioritize and organize. That meant that some things they needed to stop doing, because one thing we have to learn is we really can't do it all. And of course, on the flip side, I always say, well, there's plenty of time for sleep in the afterlife, but that's not good either, because we also have to take care of ourselves. And one of the ways we take care of ourselves is to give ourselves little mini breaks. And that's not just because it's good for our minds, it's good for our bodies. So you all know this, we really shouldn't sit for 3 hours without getting up, moving around. It's the getting up and getting down that is the good part of that, or have good stand-up desks. And people also reported that one of the important ways that they found balance was to take some sort of significant break weekly. And that was, more than, a short break, more than just a walk, but truly trying to disconnect and doing something significant that was taking care of themselves with a break. Lots of people talked about nourishing their soul and their mind through meditation and relaxation, connecting with nature was a big part of what we heard, and taking care of themselves in other ways, and particularly taking care of our bodies, because, the body fails us, it's hard to move forward. And so a lot of what we heard from people on this component of balance was, all the good stuff that our mothers told us: get enough sleep, exercise, eat well, as in healthy. And so all of these things together are a really important part of what we need to do to take care of ourselves. Sadly, although it's changing, most organizations are not going to make this happen for us. We need to take care of it ourselves. And so as we try to balance all of this and managing our home and family situations, people have all kinds of different circumstances. Not only are there childcare issues that we saw in the last year, but now in many cases there are elder care issues. So we need to forge agreements with family members. We need to resolve problems and come up with solutions that help us balance and help us be able to focus appropriately. We need to manage the interruptions that happen. And we need to make sure that there are agreements. We need to be realistic about what we really can and cannot get done, and find other ways to get things done. We also have to realize, stuff happens. And so if we've got an emergency situation and we need to sign off of work, would you leave the office for this? Okay, we're talking about fire, blood, other kinds of emergencies. You got a kid with a fever of 103. I think you'll probably want to pay attention to that. Would you leave the office to take care of that? It's okay to stop where we are as well. And so we have to establish boundaries, not only in our physical workspace, but in terms of the interruptions, and get people in our families involved in helping us with this. One of the things that came out of the .com book was another book published in 2008 and was updated since then as well, a short little book. When I published the .com book, my daughter, who was 7 at the time, wrote the special foreword, and it was called Why It's Good to Not Work Too Much. And so that kind of took off, and we actually surveyed and interviewed and cut faxes back in that day from a bunch of kids. Everybody, they were all under the age of 10. And they told us why it was working too much will make you grumpy. And so it's a fun little book and great book to read with your kids. So in wrapping up here, I want to just also say that what we also heard from our research, and when we asked people about balance, they also talked about the importance of connecting with their communities. And lots of us have different communities. Spirituality came through loud and strong. Wasn't necessarily religion, but it was spirituality defined in lots of different ways. And family. Now, remember, when we were doing research for this, this was pre 9/11, and certainly after 9/11, all of these issues came much more clearly into focus. And COVID did the same thing in terms of smack up the side of the head to remind us about really what's important and how quickly things can change. And almost everybody I know knows somebody who either died from COVID or is a long hauler. And we still have people fearful of going back into the workplace because we feel like there's still so much we don't know about the implications of COVID. So it's been a bit of a wake-up call for us. And while I have long believed that it's an organizational imperative to embrace balance and to help people with that, sometimes we need to reach out and ask for help, or if we're running a team, be sure that we're listening between the lines for when people are getting overwhelmed so that we can help them through that. And so as leaders, what we're doing is our mandate is to bridge those distances and to help people in so many different ways, primarily through the way that we communicate, all the ways that we communicate to help them. And so I mentioned the book Remote Leadership, and just published in March, and covers a lot of these issues. And you can find that at our website, virtualworkswell.com. And we are offering a discount to all of you who are participating in this or who are watching this later until the end of May. So you can go to our store and purchase any of our resources, but these are the books that I talked about here in particular. And there is your discount code. So when you go to the store and it asks for your discount code, you can put in WITIOC 15, and you get a 15% discount on your total in the store for anything that you're purchasing. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. And before we move into Q&A, I would just like to thank everyone. In case you need to sign off, thank you for joining, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you. And I am happy to hear any comments, suggestions, other good ideas that you have, or questions. So Stacy, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, Deborah, so we've got a question in the chat. How to let my boss be aware that I'm working a lot? What's the best approach to that?
Yes, okay. So, and everybody has different kind of bosses. Some of them are more empathic than others. And so I get to tell this story a lot. I used to work for this vice president, and I'd sometimes get overwhelmed, and I'd go to him and say, Rich, I really can't get everything. There's too much on my plate. And then I'd leave my meeting with Rich, and I realized that all Rich did was move everything around on my plate, but he didn't take anything off of my plate. And so our performance management systems, if we have the right performance management systems in place, we're doing routine updates. So you should be having with your boss regular meetings on what your priorities are and how you're coming along with those. And that doesn't mean you need to do this every month, but certainly if you feel like you're working too much and that puts you at risk to be hitting the exit, you have an obligation to let your boss know that. So, so one way to do that, and bosses do that to us all the time. They send us emails at 9 o'clock at night. So you could be sending emails and say, you know, I'm still working. On the other hand, I got over this a long time ago. And it's an important thing to realize. Most organizations, if you want to kill yourself at your job, I mean, they will let you. So only you can manage. I used to actually use in these work-life balance presentations, I used to use a slide that had a gun, an image of a gun in it. It's a little risky to do that now, but my point I would say is nobody's holding a gun to your head. So I would start with asking, if you're working too much, do you know why you're working too much? Is it because lack of clarity on your objectives? You're not clear about your priorities. You really have too much work to do. You can't balance it with everything in the rest of your life, and figure that out first. And then is that a problem you can correct, or is that an organizational problem? And now if the question is about, you know, you're out of sight, out of mind, and you just want to stay visible, that raises a really interesting question about how we even do networking and how we keep ourselves visible. And I encourage people to initiate as much as possible, reach out, don't wait for your boss or other people to reach out to you. Be as engaged as possible, speak up during meetings, and reach out if you need help. And we have a link up here. And what is this link for? Q-Ring link.
David, are you on?
Oh, that's just the press release for our new CEO that we announced today, Michelle.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Including there for everybody.
Okay. All right. Good.
So Deborah, I was thinking about another thing that I've seen a lot of people get challenged with is, you know, at least with a lot of clients that I know, they don't use the video portion of the meeting. So people's cameras are off.
Right.
And you've got these teams that are working together, and some maybe they've only known each other during the pandemic, which means with cameras off, and trying to communicate effectively when you're missing those facial nuances. Do you have any suggestions about how to?
Yeah, great question, because, you know, we're sitting here, those of us who use and love technology, saying, yippee, we finally got this great, easy to use technology where we can see each other. Not seeing each other was always one of the biggest obstacles to remote work. And so now we can see each other and people are turning their cameras off. Why is that? And I actually was talking to a guy not too long ago. He works for a tech company. They do system stuff. And he said, yeah, we don't even have our cameras on anymore. We don't need to see each other. And so I think teams need to have a standard. If you're going to have a Zoom meeting and some people have their cameras on, I think you should make it an expectation everyone has their cameras on, because really you wouldn't have a meeting on site and have some people in there and other people, you know, holding up a piece of paper in front of their faces, right? And so I think it's an issue to raise with the team. And either we don't use cameras or we use cameras. But as a leader, I would strongly suggest that it be set as an expectation. And maybe not every meeting. Again, think about what technology do we need to accomplish the meeting. And but as a leader, I sure want to see people. I want to be able to see their facial expressions. And particularly in global teams, where you have different cultures, where you may have people who aren't going to be as assertive, speaking up, asking questions. You really need to be watching for levels of confusion or lack of commitment that could impact their ability to be motivated or to get results. So I'm a big advocate of cameras. I think, you know, God gave us this technology and we should be using it more effectively. I don't know if that answered your question.
Does someone else have something else? I know we see a lot of teams that are across time zones,
Yeah,
not, in the US, but also expanding, actual teams that are working together, that are going across, Malaysia and India and Europe. Have you seen kind of the way to navigate that? So you're trying to make it fair, but I mean, especially like we were thinking, I've seen a lot of teams go 7 a.m. But then for people who are trying to get their kids ready, that's like the worst time. So
Yeah.
what have you seen works?
yeah, so that's an important issue. And I did some work with the global help desk at JP Morgan Chase several years ago. And they, of course, had people between India and Singapore and people in the United States. And the senior VP was in New Jersey, and 3 of his direct reports were also in New Jersey. And so the woman in Singapore usually got stuck with the 7 p.m. time, because on the East Coast, we were at 7 a.m. And so it wasn't so great for the guy in India either. So what they figured out, there's another dynamic to their situation. And that was the 3 people in New Jersey and the senior VP. Well, they were all there in the office, so they would meet in a conference room, right? And so the poor woman in Singapore, when we actually did needs analysis with them, she said, I would volunteer, because this senior VP kind of rated people on how assertive they were and how much they raised their hand and said, hey, Bob, I'll get involved. I'll help with that. And she said, I never get a chance to say, Bob, I'll be glad to help, because the 3 women in New Jersey who were a lot more assertive and sitting right at the table with Bob said, oh, got it, Bob. And the woman in Singapore who's translating in her head, and then we have this, this lag of time, never got to be involved. So one of the solutions to that was they stopped meeting in a conference room in New Jersey, and the 4 of them either stayed at home or they worked from their workstations, so they weren't face to face. They leveled the playing field, number one, and then they also opted to shift their meeting times. So it was fairer to some people, so that the woman in Singapore wasn't the only one that had to deal with trying to, in her case, she was trying to get dinner for her family. And she was home and her workday was done, but she was having to participate in, critical team meetings. So it depends on the situation, depends on how essential it is to be locked into a certain time. And so rotating times is one way to get around that. I also think using video, particularly when we're having global meetings, is also really helpful because we have different cultures and different ways that people interact. As a leader, I would want to see all those people. It's also a way, to me, it brings more humanness to this very, kind of non-human way that we have to interact now. And we spent so many years, decades, yearning for a better way to do it, and now we've got it.
Thank you. And I'm just looking to see if there's anything else in the chat. Anyone, not in the chat, want to raise your hand, have a question?
And I put my email address here on this slide. Anyone's welcome to follow up with me if you have any follow-up questions, or certainly anything that I can help you with. And I want to jot down before it disappears. Kudo boards, thank you for that. That's one I haven't heard of yet, so I'm going to check that out.
Hybrid meetings, do they really work?
So hybrid meetings, I'm not seeing that one.
Yeah, did you want to say more about that?
Sure. And this is this is for my Toastmasters club, actually. So they're going to have hybrid meetings, right? So that means some people are there in the room, like talking, and then other people are on the video. And I thought it was so interesting, Deborah, what you said is leveling the playing field, is that in team meetings, maybe you wouldn't do it that way. Everyone would be on their at their desks at a
Right.
video.
Right, or home.
Or home,
Yeah.
yes.
Right.
However, sometimes that's not the case, and you do have these hybrid meetings, and just wanted to see if you had any feedback about that.
Yeah, people ask me increasingly about hybrid, and the subtitle of our book is Leading Work from Anywhere and Hybrid Teams. And we put the hybrid in there because we know that's the direction that the workplace is going, but we don't know a lot about how it's going to work. Because
Right.
there hasn't been a lot of that yet. Now we're learning about hybrid school, right? Because a lot of our kids are, kind of in school Monday and Tuesday, and then they clean on Wednesday, and a different group goes in on Thursday and Friday, and then the next week they mix it up again. So using that model, the workplace is going to be a little bit like that. And I do think your Toastmasters group is replicating what's going to be happening in the workplace, where some people will be there. And if they're there, they're going to be inclined to maybe gather in a meeting room. And I think we will get more comfortable with that. But until we do, or depending on the dynamics, like, my situation with the global help desk team, where we, had someone who didn't feel like she could ever get a word in edgewise with the pushy women from New Jersey who were sitting right at the table. And, when I shared that with the VP, he got it. He was great. He said, well, then, we need to stop doing that because I really value her input and I don't hear from her. He was thinking she wasn't engaged, and that wasn't the issue at all. So I think as that starts to happen, bring more consciousness to it and say, hey, so some of you are there and some of you are remote. Let's talk about what are the rules of engagement. So you can either level the playing field or you can have new rules of engagement. What does that look like? Certainly, here's one rule right off the top. The people in the room can't be having little sidebar chitty chat conversations with each other because that really is alienating. First of all, it's really distracting and it's alienating to the people who aren't there. Little comments under your breath that nobody really can hear who's not in the room. Those kind of things would have to not happen. But how will people know that they shouldn't happen unless we talk about it? So I would use that as a point of discussion. If we're going to have these kind of gatherings, how do we want to do that together so it's in the best interest of everyone?
One of the things I noticed with hybrid meetings, and I've been part of them for decades, is the what the telecom abilities are in the room. So let's say if you're in you've got a long table and you've got a Polycom right in the middle, a lot of times you can't hear the people at the ends. So that's what I've noticed, or even in a very, very large, more of a lecture kind of room, that also depends. And I've seen if you've got speakers and mics all over the place, you can hear everyone. So
much better.
Yeah, I've seen big rooms where you could actually hear everyone. So yes, it's possible.
Right. So I have spent years realizing, we have the International Space Station flying around up there, and we have crappy video calls or teleconferences. We can't hear each other on Earth, but we have people traveling to the moon. So what's wrong with that picture? Well, what's wrong with it is if you have one Polycom device in the middle of a long table, you have crappy technology for what you're trying to do. And companies haven't invested in the right technology for what they were trying to do. It was just it wasn't enough of that technology. So, if you go to, a nice hotel that's set up for a really nice conference, they have mics all around the tables. It's so much better. Another solution, if you only have one microphone in a small room, one of the things that I've done in some situations is even if it's just around the table, you don't have a podium per se, but if you have different people speaking or presenting part of the agenda, they move to where the microphone is. Just make it like they're standing up at a podium. So they go to where the microphone is so other people who aren't there can hear them. And I sit on several boards, and 2 of them are hospital boards. Oh my gosh, they do great surgery, but they do really crappy virtual meetings. And I've had to listen to them for the last year because we haven't had any in-person board meetings at the hospital yet. So coming out of COVID, there will be some reminders, and I'm going to try to help them with that. So I think you just have to find solutions, and you all are in technology, so you can advocate for, we need to, up our game on the tools that enable remote work to be effective.
Sounds great. Terrific. Thank you, Deborah. Any other questions? Anyone? Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming here and educating us in all the areas of remote, both from, you know, a worker and also for someone leading a team. And thanks everyone for being part of this event and, you know, putting your questions out and doing the polls. Great session.
Thank you. Thanks. I enjoyed it very much. Great to see you all.
Good to see everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.